Jackie. So unfortunately, my phone actually died. Patrick, do you have yours? Because we like to do a picture with everybody holding up their book. So if you will do that, Patrick will come and take a photo. Oh, you can hold up either one. You know, whichever appeals to you. Go for it.
Wow.
Actually, Jackie, you want to stand there?
Oh, sure.
Instagram is room to solve, right?
Oh, yeah, is that for me?
Only one of them.
Of course, it's for you. All right, ready, everybody?
Do that, seriously.
Fantastic. Great.
Wonderful. Oh, Susan, such a coward. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Jackie's and my 17th event together, all the way from 2003. Here's to you, love. Now, I will take, I wouldn't normally comment, but I'm actually wearing my Jackie shirt. When one of her visits, we broke away and we went to Eileen Fisher. And each of us bought this black shirt. Now, I have to say that it looks way better on Jackie, who's built for it, than it does me. But whenever I put it on, I think of her. So I thought tonight I should certainly wear it to welcome you back.
Am I on? Yes?
You are.
I wish I'd worn mine. I wish you'd given me a heads up, then we'd go on the same thing.
I would come out poorly if we did that. So I'm really glad that you didn't. Actually, I think you look gorgeous like you are, but you always do. So Jackie and I were talking earlier. Her first event here, she flew in. She stayed at our house. She sat on our couch with our puppy afterward, and it was. You were so nervous.
I was so nervous. It was one of my, I think it was only my first event, maybe my second.
Second.
And yes, it was. And it was one of those times when my heart was beating so fast. I actually looked down and I saw my blouse. And I thought, oh, we're in trouble now. I hope they've got, a defibrillator somewhere around here.
We had a therapy dog. A really excellent dog who's no longer with us. But it was
very relaxing just sitting there with the dog. I remember I was really tired at the time. And it was fascinating because earlier in the day, and I didn't know this until you told me, Maureen Corrigan had reviewed Maisie Dobbs on Fresh Air, which was just brilliant.
Yes,
and
yes.
Rob had recorded it, and so we listened. And I remember being really shocked. Everybody was shocked.
It was milestones from the very beginning, and Maisie Dobbs is still in print, as are all of the other books.
I don't know that she's on.
Am I not on?
She's on.
Right now. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
You want to trade microphones? I have much louder voice. Try it out.
Oh, I can yell at that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Does it sound any different? Does it sound different?
Yeah. Oh, whatever. You can still hear me, right? Yeah. Okay, right. Can all of you in the back, because I see a lot of you standing, can you hear? Or do you want us to turn up the mics? We can turn them up just a little bit. How's that? Better? Okay. And you're up to? Wonderful.
Am I up to? Yes.
You are. All
Can
right.
you
Well,
hear me now?
we weren't saying anything important, so you haven't actually missed anything yet. But now we'll talk. I have already apologized to Jackie the fact that because this is on sale day, it was not possible for me to get any more copies of What Will Maisie Do. So for those of you frustrated by its absence, I apologize, and we will rush in some more. But tell us a little bit about What Will Maisie Do before we talk about The American Agent.
Okay, I will. Right from the start, when Maisie Dobbs was published, I had people getting in touch with me, emails, or I met them at events like this, and they would often say to me, why don't you publish a book of Morris's sayings or Maisie's sayings and Morris's wisdom, what have you? And I used to say, well, that's a really sweet idea, but I just don't think I have the material for it. And I didn't think I'd ever be able to do it because I didn't think my publisher would be interested. And this kept coming up over the years, and it's interesting just how many times I heard people say to me, oh, whenever I'm trying to figure out what to do about XYZ problem, I think to myself, what would Maisie do? And I was hearing that from one end of the country to another on book tours. And as there often is, there was a catalyst to light a fire under me, if you will. And I'll try and be quick with the story. But I have, as most authors do, a literary agent, and one of her other clients was a most wonderful woman called Amy Krause Rosenthal, a very creative writer, wrote a lot for children, wrote beautiful coloured books, and she also has, you can still see her website, it's called The Beckoning of Lovely, and she really encouraged people to make things. And her birthday was just the day before mine, and my literary agent's was 2 days later, so the three of us used to, even though I'd never met her, kind of trade the good wishes and so on. And sadly, in February 2017, she passed away. In fact, you might have read one of her last pieces of writing. It was in the Modern Love column in New York Times, and it was called "You May Want to Marry My Husband." And it, as they say, it went viral.
Yes.
And I was, as anybody would be, I was so, I think, shocked and hurt by her passing, and you sort of ask, why was someone like that taken, so to speak. And I looked at her videos again, and I saw the video, The Beckoning of Lovely, and the whole idea of making something. I thought, I really want to make something. And so I turned to Maisie Dobbs, and I thought, I want to make something different out of Maisie Dobbs. And now, trust me, I am no artist. But I made a mock-up of this little book called What Would Maisie Do? And I started to write the content. And I showed the mock-up to my agent, who went, oh, that's kind of interesting. And she said, let me show it to your editor. So she showed it to my editor, who went, well, that's kind of interesting. Oh, let me send it down to the design department. So that, you know, it was a little mock-up that I made. Went down to the design department and came back and said, we think we can do something with this. And so one thing led to another. I wrote all the content, I sourced the photographs, I decided how I wanted it to look and feel, and believe me, it looks a lot better than my mock-up. But it was, but you know, something that I finally did, and it was at the request of my readers, you know, people like you, and also inspired by someone who was an absolutely lovely lady. And I would encourage you to just Google The Beckoning of Lovely, Amy Krause Rosenthal, and it'll make you want to make something, even if it's only a mess in your kitchen, because that's what she said she was really good at. So that was the genesis of What Would Maisie Do, and I decided that what I wanted it to be was something, sort of a living document, if you will, so that readers could engage with the character and with the series in a different way. Because I know that quite a lot of people keep track of different things Maisie said or Morris has said or whatever. And you'll find that there were about 28 of readers' favourite passages from the books. And I've explained my inspiration for that particular passage, and then I've asked a question, and I've left you with journaling pages. But there are also sections on the different places that are mentioned in the books, Lambeth, Fitzroy Square, Kent, and also sections on, you know, why in historical fiction things like cars and clothing and so on are important. And really it's not just because I like cars and clothing. It's, you know, it's to do with time and place. And anyway, and also it has some really lovely colour plates, and particularly the colour plates that are featured on the covers of the book. So that's What Would Maisie Do, and it was written for you.
Right. So that was one of the best sales pitches for books we can't sell you tonight. It's really embarrassing. Anyway, I can restock it very shortly. So I'm hoping that part 2 of tonight's program won't be the murder of the bookseller.
We're getting to that.
Yes. We've been friends a long time, so I hope I get a pass for this one. But in any case, we will have more very shortly. So cast your mind back 2 books ago to Maisie's trip to Munich, where she meets a character in this book, right?
That's where she met Mark Scott. And I wanted to bring Mark Scott back. I have to tell you, I think I had a bit of a crush on him. I created someone I had a crush on, and sometimes, you know, I just thought,
You know, that was Dorothy Sayers. Come on.
Was it really?
She fell in love with Lord Peter.
Oh,
Everybody
I say
knows
fall
that.
in love, you know, I'm a married woman, but you know, I mean, it's,
Well, she was.
just because you're on a diet doesn't mean to say you can't look at the menu.
Very true. Very true. It has happened that authors do form a very close attachment to their characters.
Yeah, yes. I liked Mark, and I thought there was sort of some unsaid things there, and I thought, well, I'd like to bring him back. And it just so happened that I was able to weave it into a story that had been on my mind for a while, and in quite an interesting way.
You do. So if you recall, in the last book, we are in the Boer War. Everyone know how to spell it? B-O-R-E, not B-O-E-R, which was a war that took place 45 years earlier in South Africa. But they sound very similar. So the Boer War, what was that all about?
Well, war broke out Britain declared war on Germany on September 3rd, 1939, and there was an immediate, and if you read In This Great Hour, you'll notice a pretty immediate the air raid warning went off and people scurried away to try and find shelter, and nothing happened. It was just really a test. And nothing happened for quite a while, and yet people had expected something to happen because Hitler was bound and determined to march into Britain. He was bound and determined to invade. He had done what he wanted with the rest of Europe, and he was Britain. He absolutely wanted to move into Buckingham Palace, and he wanted to do it within 2 weeks. But nothing was really happening. And then, of course, it all started to happen around about the time of Dunkirk. When France fell, that was it. But that period in between, when everybody expected something to happen and nothing did, they decided to call it the Boer War, because it was a boring war, nothing was happening. And in fact, in America, they referred to it as sort of the phony war over there. So that was the Boer War, and just shows you sort of British wit and grit at times that are difficult. Because even before, the war was declared, if you go back to spring and so on, they were already preparing for war. In Hyde Park was dug up to form shelters, to form trenches, and shelters were going up, and as you know from reading To Die But Once, they were already building additional airfields all over Britain. After Dunkirk, then, the lid was off, so to speak.
Right, and lots of things were being moved to safe places. I think, I'm trying to remember, the mines in Wales, there was a lot of art moved to places like that.
British Museum and V&A, they moved
Right.
all their stuff into.
I mean,
into
really, it's
tunnels.
remarkable how many things survived the Blitz
Yes.
because of that preparation. Years ago, when Rob and I were in Ulm, which is a German city, can't remember which river it's on, it has a beautiful cathedral, very, very Gothic. The guide to the cathedral gave us a tour and told us very proudly about how they had taken their statues and so forth and put them down in the crypt of the cathedral and wrapped them up. So that, they used sandbags and so forth. So the cathedral in Ulm, unlike, because it was heavily bombed, did survive. So I guess that was the strategy all the way around.
It was, although in Britain there was a lot of stuff that just couldn't be
Lost,
stored.
right. And in Milan, I've always thought this was so interesting. The Milanese lit the Duomo. They put all their brightest lights on the Duomo, basically saying, please don't hit it. And nobody ever did, because it would have been, truly an architectural loss, disaster.
Whereas if you take London, Hitler was absolutely, he wanted to knock down St Paul's
St. Paul's,
Cathedral.
right.
Absolutely. And they literally had people running, because it had a wooden roof, they were running all over it, particularly on December 29th, 1940, which was one of the worst days of the Blitz. The Blitz started basically on, and the Blitz, sometimes people think, well, Britain was only bombed for a sort of 6 to 9 month period. In fact, it was bombed all the way through the war, except that the Blitz was a very specific type of bombing strategy utilized by the Luftwaffe, Goering and the Luftwaffe. And it started September 7th, 1940 and went right through to May 1941. And it was absolutely relentless. And on that particular night, St. Paul's was saved. And I think many of you have probably seen that wonderful, iconic photograph of St. Paul's with the smoke and flames licking up around it. And just one of the places in London that was saved. Having said that, post-war, they always said the London County Council did more to ruin London than the Luftwaffe ever did. It was an excuse to pull down old buildings.
Of course, it was really ironic with St. Paul's because it was built to replace the St. Paul's that went in the Great Fire of London in the 16s, whatever it was. So, yes, it was remarkable. What was the role of the Thames in all this? Was it kind of like a pathway for the Luftwaffe?
It actually was, because it's like it's like this big finger that goes right in through central London, through the docks, and during the Blitz they were aiming for the docks. It's you cripple a country by what it can and cannot bring in, and of course not only was in that area were there the docks and so much of what was really precious to the British people, but also it was it lit up like a firework, if you will. And if we take and use this example, I was talking to Barbara about this earlier, December 29th, 1940. It was what they call a bomber's moon, so it was lit up anyway. And all they needed to do was come along and they dropped bombs and incendiary devices, and the Thames was lit up even more, and it just pointed them straight through the heart of the capital. And the visual they could get was phenomenal. And when I'm talking about the Blitz and the strategy, the bombing strategy, we're not talking about a few bombers. We're talking about hundreds of bombers coming in V formation, flanked by fighter aircraft. Initially they weren't, but later they were. It only took a few days to work out they needed to have fighter aircraft, but it was hundreds of them. And if you can imagine, one of the first ones that hit 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and in a September afternoon, and you can imagine the sky going black with bombers. People going about their business and the sky goes black. It's like that movie Independence Day, if you ever remember the trailers for that. And it's just the most terrible dread and the most terrible death and destruction follows.
So why are we talking about this, you may well ask. And the answer is that when the book opens, Maisie and her friend Priscilla are driving ambulances through the Blitz, hoping to rescue people. And unsurprisingly, this being a murder mystery, there is a dead person, probably not killed by a bomb.
Yes, that's a young war correspondent joins Maisie and Priscilla on this particular run, and the book actually opens with her broadcasting to America. She's hoping to become one of quote unquote Murrow's boys, and to join the what they called warcasters operating in Britain at the time. And I have always, ever since I was in my tweens, had such an interesting curiosity about the work of war correspondents, and particularly women, and sort of grown up with this. And I just, for a long time I knew that there would be a war correspondent in one of the Maisie Dobbs books, and so Catherine Saxon joins them on their run. She makes a broadcast, and then unfortunately she is discovered deceased the next day.
So America was not participating in the war at this point. There was still a lot of isolationist attitude, which really came out of the First World War, and Senator Robert La Follette in Wisconsin in the 1920s. The American heartland was not in favor. And so the role of Edward R. Murrow and other correspondents broadcasting by radio from London into the United States had a remarkable effect. And Jackie and I were talking earlier about the intimacy of radio, and also about the fact that it's a group experience. Well, you could be a single person, but in general, there was like a radio in a whole family or something. How different it would be, to be sitting there with a group listening to this one voice. Totally different than, looking at your phone and listening to or getting your news from people you don't know or possibly can't trust, or whatever. That was not the case with Murrow and later Walter Cronkite. Remember, most of you may not remember Murrow if you're not as old as I am, but you could remember Walter Cronkite for sure, even Dan Rather.
The terrific thing about Morrow was how I guess in a way he created modern broadcast journalism, and because even on both sides of the Atlantic this was so, the news or that which was on the radio was actually quite formal even when it involved music. Definitely in Britain, in the BBC, even though the radio was not a visual medium, the newscasters, as they were called, the newsreaders, would be required to wear a dinner jacket and bow tie, and of course they spoke with very clipped tones, and which definitely set them apart from everybody else. And the news was just given out. It was just the bare bones. There was not often passion or any intimacy in that way about it. But at the same time, the radio was groundbreaking for people, because if you look back to the sort of 1920s and 30s, this was a time when, on both sides of the Atlantic, unless you had money, you left school at a very early age. And although, and some people left school with not the greatest literacy in the world. And so they couldn't read the newspapers. They didn't have time to read the newspapers, and there was a gap there. But radio came in, the wireless, as it was called in Britain, came in. And suddenly that was available to people. They could listen to the news. But here's what was different about Morrow. And when he first went to Europe, it was really, I suppose, in some ways more of a production person. He had to pull it all together. It was other people's news. But he started realizing, particularly when he was in London, and he was only young, he was only 27. I mean, you sometimes think of him as an older man, but he was 27 years old, went over there with his wife, his young wife, and he realized that he wanted to communicate the immediacy of what was happening to people. He went out into the streets. He famously held a microphone above the street level and broadcast this to the US later, that sound is people running towards the shelter. They're trying to get to the shelter because bombs are falling around us. And so there was this immediacy, and his broadcast went out sort of 11 o'clock in the evening, and sometimes much later he would do 2 or 3 broadcasts. So that was when people were sitting down to dinner in the United States. And that collective, community sitting around listening to the radio news. And slowly but surely people started to realize this is not something that's just happening over there. Britain is holding the line against the Nazi threat, and this could be happening here. That could be us running towards shelters if we don't help Britain. So this isolationism, the tide started to turn, and it's it's often said that Edward Murrow and his ilk, there were other people, Quentin Reynolds, there was Molly Downs, who was writing for the New Yorker, Mary Marvin Breckinridge, get her name tight. She'd actually just left to come home at that point to America, but she famously, when she was one of Murrow's boys, and during a radio broadcast she had a cough, and she tried to settle her cough, and Murrow said to her, no, don't, next time that happens, don't do it. I want people to know you're human, that you're a human being that has a cough, you're not just a dummy, And so it really changed. It was soft propaganda, if you will.
How many of you saw the movie The King's Speech with Colin Firth? Well, then you know how important radio was and how difficult it was for the king to learn to speak and to broadcast to his people. I thought they did a marvelous job of that, because he had that terrible stutter, so it was so hard for him to speak in public.
Especially during the war, when it was so important to hear the king. He struggled with that, but it was a turning point for the royal family in some ways, was when Buckingham Palace was hit by a bomb, and the Queen Mother, or she called the King, she was the Queen then, famously said, at least I can look the East End in the face.
Right.
Because, the East End was hit very, very badly. If you can imagine, people running into a church hall that was then hit, and 300 people were instantly killed or more. And some of the shelters initially, they were just trenches in the ground, and that's obviously when people started started going to the underground stations and so on.
So here's Maisie driving an ambulance. Here's Priscilla, who has sons who
Yeah.
are going to be at risk, right? Because
Well, one has already, if we remember,
Yes.
to die at once, one's
Yep.
already done his bit, and then there's the eldest one.
right, so it isn't just Maisie's story. It
No.
involves the other people in her lives. It's always funny. I was a French major, so I cannot say Maurice Blanc, or however Jackie pronounces it. He's
Maurice
Maurice Blanche to me. Whenever you call him Maurice, I always go what? But even though he's gone, he actually is always there.
I always meant him to be a presence, even after, some people might not know that yet, so anyway. So I always wanted him to continue to be a presence, and let's face it, if someone has been really important in your life, they're always a presence, they're always with you. And she of course has, her history of the lessons that he taught her and how he nurtured her, and she draws upon that, and she's gone back over his papers and things like that and discovered new things about him. But one of the things that, the elements of the story that I, from close to the beginning, when I first wrote Maisie Jobs, I didn't know I had a series. It wasn't until my editor called me and said, can we talk about the next book in the series? And I thought, right, okie dokie. And so I was given an opportunity in a way to look at how I might want a series to develop. And I realized that I wanted not only there to be an arc of each story, but there to be an overall arc. That I wanted to see how these people, not just Maisie Jobs, but how this group of people grew and changed and were impacted by the events, not only of their day, but just the things that happen to human beings along the way. Because I wanted them to have that essence of being human. There were things that we all have to put up with, whether we've got a high-powered job or not a job or whatever. And then, ever since I was a kid, actually, I'd always wondered, what did it feel like for my grandfather, for example, who had been severely wounded at the Battle of the Somme? How did he feel when he saw his sons in uniform again? So how does it feel to go through one war and then see another war looming? That's why a lot of people were really hoping that there would be some sort of appeasement, because they didn't want another war any more than Americans wanted another war. But then, when it's obvious, that one's coming, well, everybody braces themselves and, as they say, kept calm and carried on. But so I really wanted to see what might happen to this group of people as time went on, and how they might grow and change, and then of course having to deal with Priscilla's boys.
So, without saying a lot more about the plot, you may imagine that the death of this American girl was easy to write off, but not with Maisie on the scene, right? Right. So Maisie questions it, and therefore the American that we mentioned way back, he reappears, not in Munich, but now here he is in London. There's probably not a whole lot more we should say about how the story unrolls.
I think we have to be very careful now.
Right.
We're both going to be standing here tap dancing.
We will. But I am going to say that next time Jackie comes, I should make it a prerequisite that you have read this book, because there are some things at the end of this book that would really be worth talking about. But we don't want to do that this evening and spoil it for you. But just pay attention, take notes. Even if you don't have a copy of what Maisie would do, what would Maisie do? We'll get you one. It's a very interesting book. I remember way back when, maybe it was like book 2 where you actually knew it was going to be a series, but I didn't know that you were ever going to write it out of the 1930s. I thought maybe Maisie would stay in the aftermath of the First War and not ever get to the Second War. Did it just kind of come upon you as book after book went on?
Part of me knew I'd always go there. When you've got a series, you never know when everybody might get fed up with your series, so you don't know when you might have the opportunity, but I knew I wanted to explore that. And I think mystery is a terrific vehicle for exploring these sorts of times, because it does represent a journey through chaos to resolution. And I mean, that's why, I mean, look at it, I think some of the best literature today is within the mystery
The crime
form,
genre.
the crime genre. It really is. And it offers you so much. And I just, there was a point at which I thought, yes, I am going to go there, and I am going there. And that is part of the arc of the story of this group, if you will, this family group. So what I thought I was creating as much as anything was actually almost like a family saga through these periods of chaos which come and go in life as well. And it's actually really interesting because I'm very fortunate to have quite a lot of input on the covers, because it was discovered fairly early on that Andrew Davidson, who creates the artwork, and we kind of, we're on the same page about things, and when I explain something to him, he can absolutely see it in his mind's eye. So what he does, he works up a sketch based upon us trading a few emails, and then when it's approved, and sometimes that's a bit of a process, it goes to being, he does a woodcut. And that woodcut, once it's down, it doesn't change, because you can't fiddle around with a woodcut. And then someone else, a creative director, pulls the whole thing together. Here's the interesting thing, about 5 or 6 years ago, Andrew emailed me, and this is an artist of long standing, and he has a very similar sort of family background. His father and mother come from the same part of London that my parents and extended family come from. So he knew who Maisie Dobbs was straight away. He knew the background. But he said to me, he said, Jackie, I've always wanted to create an image of the Blitz. He said, with the searchlights, with the fire, the burning. He said, and planes overhead. He said, I've always wanted to be commissioned to do something like that. He said, will I ever have the chance with your series? And I said, I think you will, but it won't be yet. And so it was about a year ago when my editor said, it's time for you to talk to Andrew. I just sent him an email with a couple of photographs, a description of what I saw in my mind's eye. And I said, this is it. This is your opportunity. Go for it. It's your time to do your Blitz scene. And personally, I think he outdid himself. He really outdid himself.
Yes, it's a remarkable cover. So one of the other tensions that's always gone on in the books is Maisie as a private inquiry agent, as we would say in Brit speak, as opposed to private eye. And then she has done some work for Scotland Yard and so forth. So, there have been some books where she's had some moral dilemmas about who she's serving and so forth. In this book, you've got several agencies involved.
Yes, there's the American Embassy, and there's the Secret Service, and there's all sorts of people coming together, and of course Robert McFarlane, who I've always quite liked. I mean, he's such a contrary character, you're going to like the guy. And I mean, he really deliberately, has a dig at Maisie just to get her going every now and again. He manages it every time, he gets her going a bit. But yes, there are. It's putting those together. And the truth is that in a time of war, all sorts of people either talk to each other or they don't. They're secret or they're not. And so, yes, all sorts of things come out in this book.
Yeah, the Official Secrets Act. Any of you watched any of the things that have spun off Bletchley Park, where people did all that work and then never could talk about it, and on and on and on.
Here's the thing about the Official Secrets Act, though, in Britain, that even though you're required to sign it if you do anything for the government, when my mother worked on the government telephone exchanges, she had to sign the Official Secrets Act, or the document to say that she adhered to the Official Secrets Act. And the fact is, if you're a British citizen, you are bound by it anyway. You're absolutely bound by it. Yes. So, I mean, I can't tell you about my work with MI5, that's what it means. It's secret about that.
I just got set up for that. Totally fabulous. One other aspect of Jackie's books, and you can tour London, you can go to Kent, you can visit many of the British settings, but I had the experience of being in Gibraltar for over a day, with having just read, or maybe, I can't remember whether the dates coincided.
It was a dangerous place.
Right, but I'm
I
trying
think
to
it was. I
remember.
think you went. I think you went there after I.
It was
It
afterwards,
was
I
about
can't
a year
remember,
afterwards,
maybe it was
wasn't
the year afterward. But anyway, it turned out that A Dangerous Place was an excellent guide to Gibraltar. So I did various things. I had a day of my own there. And it was really fascinating. Gibraltar is such an interesting outpost, still in contention, I gather, as part of Brexit. But what's really fascinating is the only way you can get to Gibraltar is either you go in on a ship or you fly in from Heathrow. But if you're there, you can't take a plane to Barcelona. You have to go back to Heathrow and then go wherever, which is phenomenally expensive. As I learned, that was when
walk across the border though.
you can walk across,
As I did.
but yeah, taxis can meet you, and then if you go to Malaga, you can catch a train or
That's
something.
right.
My husband, who did not have the fatal heart attack that the cruise ship claimed he was having and evacuated him, which is why I was all by myself and trying to figure out how to get off the cruise ship in Gibraltar and go and meet him. He was fine. He was actually having a great time on Lisbon going out to Gibraltar. The treatment for what he had was Tylenol, but they wouldn't let him back on the ship. I learned, I probably wouldn't have, if I'd been there just having a good time with Rob being a tourist, I would never have learned all these things or how to exit. But it made me realize, that Britain has had over the century these interesting outposts which were strategic and naval. Malta,
very
Gibraltar,
very
Hong
strategic.
Kong, whatever. And so, today we think of Gibraltar as kind of anachronism with monkeys, but in the war, it was a critical part
It's
because it's the
actually
gateway to the Mediterranean.
That's why it's still important. It is the gateway to North Africa, the Mediterranean, and it is
And
crucial.
Suez.
It's
Yeah.
very crucial. It's a naval outpost and has been since the 1700s. And it's really important to Britain. Remains important to Britain. That's why Britain doesn't really want to give it up. And on paper, nor should it, because Spain relinquished Gibraltar. And the Gibraltarians don't want to be part of Spain. Very much so. Do not want to be part of
Very
Spain.
true. And many of them are British, or they are British,
They're
but I
kind
mean,
of an interesting hybrid.
Yeah.
They speak a mixture of Spanish and English to you all at once, and it's really funny. They call you darling a lot, just darling. Okay, darling. And I just couldn't get over that. I went a couple of times.
There are some very British institutions in
Yes.
Gibraltar, which are a lot of fun. Why did you pick Gibraltar for Maisie? Was going to be my question. It was a long prologue to get to the actual question.
Because I'd been and I really was curious about the place, and I wanted to weave it into a story, and it so fit that part of the story. I just knew for the time I went there, and I went there quite a few years before I ever wrote A Dangerous Place. I just knew it would be woven in. So it's one of these things I tuck away. You see, it's interesting. Last week I was asked in an interview a couple of weeks ago that it said that your books are often, they so reflect what's happening now. Do you do that deliberately? And the answer is no, I don't, because my books, they're seeded long before I write. But history is an interesting thing. It's like fashion. It comes around again. It just looks a bit different. The shoulder pads that people wore in the 1940s looked a bit different from the ones they wore in the 1980s and so on. Things repeat themselves. Events, almost identical events, repeat themselves. They just come around again. So where was I going with that with Gibraltar? It was the fact that, I went there long before I wrote about it, but I was so intrigued with the place, I knew that I would weave it in, and it just fit at just the right time, especially in Maisie's life and what might happen there.
Well, I think at this point, maybe we should turn this over to questions, don't you?
Absolutely,
Right,
yes.
so take it away.
Just one at the back, please.
You mentioned that you expected it to be a story arc from the 30s into World War II.
Yeah.
Where do you feel you are on the book arc? Are you
Yes, your question is where am I on the book arc? That's a really good question, and I'm not going to answer it quite honestly. I'm just going to say there's more on the arc behind me than there is in front of me. I'm going to be writing this in 16 years' time. So I'm going to be sitting on a beach somewhere with a lot. But no, no, seriously, I'm a good way across. Yeah, but so that's about, as Forrest Gump says, what I'm going to say about that. Any other questions?
Wait, can we hold on a minute? I'm going to wave goodbye to our Facebook audience. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And a reminder that